From Dragon 360, this is Digital Banter, a podcast focused on modern marketing tactics and driving real business results. And now, here are your hosts.
Welcome back, everyone, for another episode of Digital Banter. We have James Kravik, as always, as my co-host.
What's up, everybody?
So, interesting topic for today. We were going to have a guest, a 5-year-old that was going to tell us about dinosaurs, big trucks, climate change, and everything he's learning about school, but apparently he has a more important engagement, so we had to call in our reserves, and we have a different guest, our head of brand strategy at Dragon 360, Melyssa Rossman.
Hey, guys.
So Melyssa joins us to talk about a hot topic in our minds for this year, but really prevalent across the entire landscape of B2B and complex sales and organizations, brand and product marketing. And how do you incorporate brand into product marketing, and why they ultimately need each other to be successful for each of their endeavors and efforts, but for the business itself. So let's kind of kick this off a little bit by talking about the difference between product and brand marketing. Melyssa, why don't you take that kind of as an initial answer?
Sure. So the biggest difference to me is really in the focus of what the marketer is kind of working on and what their kind of maybe medium goals would be in their day-to-day. So if I'm a brand marketer, I am probably looking at those large brand messages and, really that feeling, that connotation, that sentiment that someone would have about your brand. And sure, it's, logo and guidelines and, visuals and all of that, but it's so much bigger than that. It really is the emotional feeling or relationship that someone has with your company. And then that's kind of what I feel like brand is in the presence of brand and marketing. High level messages, all that stuff. Product is, maybe a little bit more self-explanatory, but it's the thing that you are selling. So maybe that's a SaaS platform or, what have you. It's an app, it's a whatever. So with product marketers, they're going to be very focused on feature sets, on their roadmap, on usability, on things that are as important, but are just very different than what a brand marketer is going to be working on. So you kind of are almost at opposite ends of the telescope where, your brand person is very high level and very macro focused, and your product marketer can sometimes be more on that micro level or on that, user level, feature level, more technical level that may feel less high level to maybe a brand person's perspective.
So James, I want to toss this to you in a second, but I feel like that's a good kind of baseline here of why we're talking about this topic today, because as you explained, Melyssa, these individuals and departments live at very opposite ends of the spectrum in many organizations, which creates a disconnect. It creates silos. It creates competing interests. It creates so much back and forth and inability to really move the needle forward because of that competition, that ultimately, when you bring them together in a manner in which they can truly align on goals, align on outcomes, align on strategies, you're better for it at the end of the day. And James, you being involved in paid media, but also other areas of marketing with many of our clients that, are outside of just brand strategy and product strategy, how do you come at it from a product marketing versus brand marketing perspective?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I think the big thing is like the disconnect that we're talking about. Melyssa, you mentioned the emotional side of brand, which is something that I think is a big thing that's missing from product marketing, because we are often so focused on features, unique selling points, like a lot of the stuff that we're focused, like it's almost like more in the weeds, customer feedback, short-term goals. And that's where I think brand marketing, I always like, one of my favorite quotes is that like people buy with emotion and then justify with logic. And I think on the product marketing side, we're a little bit too focused on the logic, the reason why the product exists, the problem that it solves, the technical features that we think are going to be beneficial to our customers, and the emotional messaging is almost like missing in a lot of those situations. Think about like a lot of the stuff we're doing on the product side, building case studies, white papers, all sales guides. Like these are the things that support short-term goals, but the long-term vision and messaging is often missing from the scenario.
Right. And I think another thing too is, as I've mentioned before, like competing interests and things like that, it's also the competition for resources, right? It's the competition for design, insights from customers, but also the lack of clarity that extends through all of that, and whether that feedback gets shared across those individuals and what type of feedback that is. Because to your point, James, product typically cares about a different set of insights and information than brand, which to your point, Mel, it really lives at that macro level. Now, I think the other thing to talk about as we set the stage here is, how did we even get to this point, right? Why is there so much conflict between brand and product? And Melyssa, I mean, your background is very diverse. You were agency side, in-house, agency side again. So I'd love to kind of start with you as far as where you think this is stemming from.
Sure. It can stem from a number of different places. And I think that that's also going to be directly tied to the scale of your organization and the structure of your organization. So if I am at, say, a Series A startup, you're probably going to be like maybe the second marketing hire if you're like the head of marketing or, something marketing director or something like that. Before you even walk in the door, there's obviously going to be a product. There's going to be a dev team. There's going to be, a product marketer, or at least a product manager. All of this stuff is going to exist before marketing really even thinks that it should be a part of the organization. So in that case, the difficulty is going to lie in the fact that you are kind of approaching it maybe a little bit backwards, where you have this product and now you have to market it. If you are at, say, an established, maybe larger enterprise company, or maybe a more of a household name brand, you probably have to do less lift in terms of, hey, we have a great product. Like, people maybe already know that, or they maybe already have maybe like a cult product that they will buy or will want to buy or aspire to buy. So it's less about, this specific product and more about the connotation of the brand that you're at. So if I'm at, big brand XYZ enterprise, I'm probably going to be competing with maybe some other business units, sister product lines, things like that. So among those, say you have your product marketing managers at that business unit level, they are going to be the experts in the ins and out in whatever their software or, product line or whatever it is, right? But if I am, maybe a more senior level marketer, or if I'm a brand marketer, I might be very far removed from that. So maybe I'm more involved in Marcom, or more involved in thought leadership, CSR, other stuff that are like brand initiatives that are important, but they aren't really tied to product day to day. So there can be a lot of disconnect between the information that's shared between those teams, or what you were saying earlier, Andy, about the customer insights. Am I getting that feedback loop from my customer success team, from my product team? Because I'm, kind of isolated over here on, marketing island, not with, my product marketers who are in product land. So that's a large company. And back to our small startup, there's probably a little bit less of a disconnect in the day-to-day, because you're probably, sitting right next to, or at least in the Zoom screen right next to, your product manager, because you're employee 10 or something. But you are coming into it where you're having to kind of shoehorn in things like messaging, things like brand core fundamentals. And that can often be really difficult, depending on, your founders and your coworkers, of, kind of very nicely telling them that constantly promoting features to people, or like hardcore leaning into that, isn't always the most effective, even though at the end of the day, we all want everyone to adopt this product or to buy this product. So you definitely will see a lot of the same issues at both kind of scales. But the way in which you go about it is going to need to be completely different depending on that situation.
I'm glad you mentioned kind of the startup versus enterprise perspective, because I think there's so many things from a variables perspective that get wrapped into that. I mean, everything from M&A to new product development, right, to bolting on an acquisition or creating a new product. I think it just inherently creates that imbalance between product and brand that just feeds itself, right? You create a new product. Okay, well, you need a new business unit to manage that, to create it, to develop it, to innovate it. And then what does that do? Oh, it just impacts the P&L. It adds another layer to the P&L because now you have expenses tied to a specific product, you have revenue tied to it, et cetera, et cetera. So it becomes a beast in and of itself because it just creates cyclical natures of more silos and more silos and more silos.
Absolutely.
That product level P&L piece is huge though, because I think we even see that as an agency, right? You group paid media, creative, SEO, content, and like the cost of goods sold associated with each of those, right? And as marketing team, like we're all working towards a common goal. We're all looking to drive revenue. We're all looking to drive new customers. And you need to have that through line as a common goal across the brand and at the product level, or else it's just never going to be successful. I'll tell you, it's very weird to me that almost every organization that we've ever worked with, brand seems to be in a silo. And honestly, for me, it's been SMB, enterprise, whatever. I mean, honestly, the larger you get, the worse it gets. But there's this connotation in the space that like brand isn't tied to goals because they're fuzzy, right? Like, ooh, brand fuzzy, right? But, the reality is when you incorporate, like, brand is probably also the best way to set yourself apart from another brand, because at the product level, the features level, they can build out those features, they can copy you, all of those things can happen, but brand is the one thing that you actually have complete control over.
Well, I'm really glad that you brought that up because I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, but yes, that's completely true. But also I think where it can get tough for CMOs or for, like those more senior level marketers who are directing budget to allocate to my product marketing, to my, brand anthem stuff, like in other initiatives. But, to the point you made at the very beginning of this conversation, like people make decisions based on emotions, and they can get whatever the product is probably anywhere from any number of your competitors, but they're going to buy from you because they feel like you get them. They believe that you know them, that you have the same kind of set of core beliefs and values that they do, and they're going to act on that. You're going to buy, an Apple computer or a Nike sneaker because you have this affinity for those brands, and they have these very distinct and very squishy emotional feelings, right, tied to them. Like with Apple, it's sleek, it's innovation. With Nike, that there's this like wonderful athletic history and everything that goes into that brand, and obviously White and Kennedy and the whole 9 yards there. But there's this rich kind of ethos there that you really, because my sneaker has 18% more foam in it and it's better, like sure, that's going to matter to sneakerheads, and I'm probably using all of the wrong words and they're going to boo me to hell and back. But that's not why the typical person is necessarily going to buy from Nike. They're going to buy from Nike because they like Nike and they understand what they stand for. If I don't understand what you stand for or what your values are or what really is that core differentiator at the why of your company, I have no incentive to buy from you. You might be the cheapest, you might have the feature I need, and yes, of course, that contributes to decision making. But it's certainly not the way to win at scale when you're trying to influence and really increase adoption.
Big part of brand too is like the cool factor. This may sound silly, but you mentioned Nike, and it made me think of this. Like Nike does not have a superior product. Nike has a history of like having the cool factor, and that's how they branded themselves. And quite frankly, I think a lot of tech SaaS startups have the same exact thing, like the cool factor based on how they branded themselves. We just did this analysis of like B2B targeting tools for Facebook, LinkedIn, et cetera, right? Metadata is a company out there that has the cool factor. I don't really think they have the best product. Like we reviewed all of them. I don't think they have the best product, but everybody's talking about it. Everybody's like, they've kind of built this community cool factor in a much smaller way that is going to go with them as they scale, as they add new features, as they, and Nike says like come out with new lines of clothing, shoes, etc. And like I said, once you set that trend and create that cool factor for yourself, it's something that sticks with you for a very long time. I know, Melyssa, you and I were talking about, the question I had for you is the brands like Prada and like all of the luxury brands, right? they're not that high of quality either, yet they demand a really high price point. And my question for you was like, how did they get to that point? And like you said, they all started with one product, and that one product had the cool factor that has now been carried with them for eternity.
Yeah. And I think that analogy is definitely something that easily ports over to the SaaS tech space of like, what is that hero aspect of the product that is going to align with whatever that kind of core ethos is to the brand, like why you exist, right? But then also it's going to be your key differentiator to all of the other competitors that you have. And if those are in alignment, and if your product marketing and your brand marketing are going to be working with each other instead of against each other and creating disconnect, then that's how you're going to grow quickly. That's how you're going to scale adoption. And really that's going to sell people on not only your latest product, but on products 5 years from now when you're putting out new stuff. Any company worth its salt is going to continue to expand functionality, to expand feature sets, and to grow into completely other product offerings, right? So if you have buy-in at a brand level, then it's so much easier to sell, new product down the line because people are already sold.
Definitely.
So let's talk about one of those competing interests when it comes to goals and measurement. So as the brand person on this conversation for the purposes of this question, Melyssa, should brand investment be held to the same standards of driving revenue as product marketing?
I think it should be, but with different measurement that's appropriate.
Like what?
Like what? When you think of a brand activation or brand anthem-y type work, right? It's all about your CPMs. It's all about your basically that, really. Like at the end of the day, how many people can we get this in front of for the least amount of money possible and make sure that we're saying what we want to say? That's no different really from an ad, right? You're putting the message you want to say out in front of people. You probably have a lot more sophisticated data to work with. You definitely do. But as things have moved away from, traditional means of marketing, if we're looking at digital marketing, what we do day in, day out, that ability to measure is so much better than it was even 5 years ago. So if I am pulling an IRL event, or if I am doing a celebrity endorsement, or if I'm doing some of these really large brand level type campaigns, there's no reason why they shouldn't be measured at the same kind of way that your, maybe more straight, like paid social ads for your SaaS product or whatever might be, because they're going to be on the same platforms, right?
Well, this goes into the difference too, because I think there's this line now, and this was blown up recently, is demand gen versus lead gen, blah, 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 like the whole conversation around that. And then there's also this line of demand gen versus brand. Mm-hmm. And where does that fall in line? So on the brand side, I'm going to keep using this example. You're creating the cool factor, which is helping drive demand. Brand is a piece that I think is just like layered into additional pieces. And that's where I think like in the SaaS space, there is less of like the brand anthem campaign. It's not just like hey, there's very few brands that can do that. Salesforce, maybe
Sure.
Like you can only get to the point of doing brand anthem reminders when you get to a certain level.
Yeah.
Anything besides that, I'll call it like the highest level. It's more about how you can, create that cool factor for your brand that's integrated into everything that you do. And that's where I think it's this misnomer that brand is separate. I don't know, like that's the thing that I think is, it doesn't need to be, and it's made that way. Like it's good to have a person who's in charge of brand on your marketing team and is working to integrate those brand messages into like ensuring consistency, ensuring all of that across the board, but in every single thing that you do. It's not like, and this is where I've seen companies do that. It's like, okay, we have our brand anthem campaign. They work with like the PR department, and then you have performance marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And they should, like, that all should be under one umbrella. And that's what we were talking about before. One of the big issues is team structure and P&Ls and like all of that stuff. And it just creates, without that segmentation, and things are smooth.
Yeah. Well, and I think it comes from, to your point, it's definitely structural, right? That's dependent, obviously, on the CMO and how they choose to, set up their department and do that, or if they're coming into something that they really aren't going to have much autonomy to change, unfortunately, depending on the culture of the organization. But it's also, I think, at the highest level, at that C-suite level, it can become political, right? Because at the end of the day, the CMO is, yes, they're the person signing the checks and obviously where the buck stops, but they aren't probably going to be involved in the day-to-day marketing decisions and all of that, right? Brand kind of ends up being this idea that gets punted off to maybe a more mid to junior level person or a PR department or something like that. When, to your point, it should be not something that's completely separate, right? To divorce the two, it might make sense if, I'm looking at my P&Ls, or if I'm looking at my department type turnover or burn rate or things like that. As marketers, we know that like it all has to play together in order to be successful. If I want to have this really successful product with a brand that everybody knows about and really thinks is amazing and knows for, whatever you want to be known for, like you can't end up with this like split personality in your marketing and in your content and in that kind of thing. This, again, not a SaaS example, but like JetBlue, for example, for ages was known for their best legroom and coach, and everyone is the same, and we're not going to have tiers, and we're this very like democratic and high level of service airline. And then they rolled out their kind of more budget layer of, you might get a bag, you might not. You have to pay for it, maybe. We'll tie you to the wing, which was like very much not JetBlue as JetBlue had been known. And so you kind of have this backlash that happens where, on paper, this looks great because we are, improving margins and we're getting more people into more planes more efficiently with less baggage, hopefully, literally and figuratively. And, cool, great. So we're going to market this new tier and we'll all cross our fingers and it's going to be great. Absolutely not. People were super upset because they've gone from this, kind of really premium level of service to, hey, what is this thing now that you said you would never do because you love all of us equally, JetBlue, So when there's that disconnect between the brand message, which is we're JetBlue, everything's democratic, to, oh, well, we're doing this new initiative that is now all about, budget, nickel and diming, you end up with people being really upset and changing airlines and, boycotting and doing all of that stuff. So when your brand messaging is not consistent with your product or service marketing or development, you're going to end up with tons of unhappy people. And that doesn't do anything for anybody other than damage you. At the end of the line, unless you're getting everyone in at the ground level from a product development standpoint or from a product marketing standpoint, from a brand marketing standpoint, you're just setting yourself up for silos and you're setting yourself up to really dissatisfy your customers. Getting everybody in the room on, not every day, obviously, because we all have stuff to do, but marketing needs to know about the product roadmap. Marketing and product need to be talking to customer success. Everybody needs to have a very clear line of feedback and of insights coming ping-ponging back and forth, because everyone can use that information in ways that's going to only improve not only their own purview and day-to-day work, but the collective success of what we're all working towards, which theoretically, at the end of the day, is more people on planes or more people downloading free trials or whatever it might be. So, it comes back to fostering that internal trust and respect between departments, between stakeholders, and if possible, breaking down some of those silos within your structure to make sure that people can work together in a way that's effective. If you are able to do that, which I know will be a small miracle in many companies, but you can then much more effectively start planning for collective goals together instead of measuring customer success in this way and product in this way and brand in this way. If everyone is accountable to the same kinds of goals at the end of the day, there's not going to be the finger pointing. There's not going to be the jockeying for budget because they missed their targets and we got our targets or whatever it might be. And then that allows you to also, if everyone's working towards the same goals, have really much more strategic conversation about your long-term planning. So much of the marketing budget, I feel like, is based on what are we spending this quarter? What are we spending this year? And we're not thinking about, well, what does this do for us 5 years down the line? And if we can pull up for a second and think about that, which I know, the average CMO lasts for like 2 years, which makes it even more difficult. But if we can start really thinking about that long-term planning of where do I want this product to grow into? How does that messaging need to change? What are we all working towards in terms of our, adoption rates or our, growth or whatever those KPIs might be? The better it's going to be and the more effective it's going to be. And at the end of the day, the cheaper it's all going to be because it's all going to work together instead of against each other.
So
very long rant, but
no, I actually have an idea to get some really tactical takeaways around this, right? Because we're talking a lot about how we can work together, we can work together, we can work together. So we're going to do a little role play exercise. Melyssa, you're the brand person. I'll be the product person. Andy, you be the customer success person, because that's another piece that needs to be missing. What are the things that you would want from each other role to make you successful? The reason I'm kind of going this route is that having goals is one thing, revenue, blah, 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 all of us working towards a common goal. But I feel like there are some tactical things that product can offer the brand team, that the brand team can offer the product team, that customer success can give to everybody, that are just lines of communication and better ways that, like, these are the things that we would want to be communicated to us, right? So I'll go first, and Melyssa, this honestly like feeds off of some of the stuff that we have, but like you talked a lot about like brand listening and stuff that's happening on the social side. I think a big thing that would be helpful for the product team, especially with all of our advertising and messaging and all of that, is the measurement of whether or not people like our stuff, whether or not like we are moving in a positive direction for the brand as a whole. And it is like a more granular level of insight, but what are people saying about us? What do we want to be known for? Because on the product side, you have to kind of sit back and say, we want to be known for this feature. We want to be known for this product. And it would help us have a better vision of how does this product fit into that larger goal? Are people in this larger conversation talking about our product and making that connection a lot tighter?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that social listening, brand monitoring, like all of that is part and parcel to, as a brand marketer, that's a huge part of what you do. And those insights are super valuable to the product team and eventually the customer success team as well. It's a sentiment thing, right? It's an engagement thing, but it's also, I think, is the messaging that I'm using sticking? Is the, the way that I'm describing my product or the way that I'm describing this feature, the way that other people are talking about these things? Are they using the language we want them to use? Is there a disconnect there? Or are they using language or talking about this in a way that is actually maybe better than what we're doing, or something that maybe is a little bit closer to the actual end user and using their kind of jargon or their literal pain points out of their mouths, right, in whatever we're working on. So that goes back to the customer success side on in speaking more on the inside of what do our customers think, how are they talking about the product, what are the pain points that they're having, that kind of thing. It's pretty obvious, obviously, like customer feedback, incorporating that into your product roadmap. No one needs to explain that. But keeping, me as a brand person apprised of the marketing roadmap, the product roadmap, and understanding why features are coming in or being phased out or whatever is super important, because that's a huge part of what we need to communicate. But also it can be difficult, I think, as a marketer, maybe further on the brand side, to even be able to talk about product in the right way, or in the way that an end user or a customer would, in a way that's appealing to them. And I think that's also a huge piece that we would ideally be getting from product, and again from customer success as well, in the terms of, literal like quotes and case studies and things like that too. But just really like getting closer to that end user through those departments. So to me, that's probably the biggest piece of what we can get. And then what we can give is, yes, the things like social insights, or, just information around the larger conversation. I think it can also be helpful to share competitor information, not necessarily at the product level of, hey, they've got a new feature launching, because you would know that already, but more at like, hey, they have a monumental shift in how they're approaching this kind of thing, or hey, there's this acquisition going on and we need to be aware of that, because they're going to then turn into this behemoth that we're going to have to be competing against, or, things like that are, not necessary for your day to day, but it's really good information to have and be aware of, because theoretically we are all planning together. We are all rowing in the same direction, and we all need to just be kept apprised of these things, because it's going to help us make more informed decisions that are then going to make everything roll down and be successful.
Yeah, I think you guys mentioned a lot of things from the customer success hat that I'll put on for a second. I mean, I think the other thing too that I thought of before I get into some of those things is one thing that, James, you and I have talked about a bunch of times, and you kind of coined the phrase of like using attribution tools for what they're good for, right? Like if the same thing exists within these departments, right? Using and collaborating with the individuals and the departments for what they're good with, right? Or good for. So like on the brand side, sentiment, messaging, guidelines, overarching insights about the brand, sentiment especially, because as a customer success person, right, I care about what is being said about the brand, about the product. Look, I don't want to be walking into a phone call, right, my monthly or quarterly call with a client, and be like blasted on crap that I could have known about beforehand using that same analysis. But on the same side of that, knowing the positive aspects, I can then start to phrase things differently. I can start to think about, okay, the product roadmap, right? This is where you guys two converge into what's coming up, right? How can I take that satisfaction baseline and enhance it even further? Because the other thing that I think we kind of missed out on a little bit before when we were talking about customer marketing in many cases is the fact that so many brands are focused on that this year. I think I read, something the other day about like 40% of brands are focused on customer marketing rather than net new growth, which is a huge percentage. And it's not just retention. It's about understanding those roadmaps and those sentiment analyses across not just a single product, but the entire organization. So as a customer success person, right, I understand not just how we're going to be improving things for the product that somebody owns and operates today, but where are my opportunities to grow the account, both through LTV, but also upsells, cross-sells, things like that. Not enough product people talk to each other, and then add on top of that, not enough product people even talk to brand, and vice versa, and you're just creating more of those disconnects. So I think all of that is a huge aspect of the type of data and insights customer success can glean and collaborate on from product and brand, and vice versa. To your point before, Melyssa, reviews, qualitative insights, all of those, fuzzy things that you're not going to get by listening or in the numbers, right? All of those things are so important to bring to that, so to speak, round table of stakeholders.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another thing too is a lot of brand teams will work with, agency strategy departments or things like that when they're, developing different campaigns and things, which can really uncover really strong insights around prospective new markets as well. So I feel like that is actually something that's completely unique to the brand side that really may not be evident from customer because it's literally who you're working with already, and product, who are, probably head down working on the thing in front of them. So it's really brand in a lot of ways, aside from the feature innovation and things that obviously product are responsible for, that can also just drive growth at the market level of, are there missed opportunities here in terms of who we should be talking to or who we should be building for, in addition to where we are now.
Forest from the trees.
Exactly.
I'm really glad that we didn't invite sales to this little conversation.
Right.
Hang on. Do you want me to get the 6-year-old? I can bring him over here and he can talk sales if you want.
Let's get him to come on here and ask us where the leads are. That's all we need. Lead quality's been down.
Man, I don't want to face that wrath. So I think to start to bring things to a close here, Melyssa, one thing that I'm curious to get from you is, what are some things that B2B brands can learn from the D2C and B2C side perspective when it comes to not just branding, but like product and branding relationships?
Yeah. To me, it's definitely product and brand marketing. It's not product versus brand marketing. And I think the more that we can get the verses out, the better it's all going to be. And I think that's regardless of if it's a direct to consumer or, B2C, B2B, whatever your model is, that's just facts. if we're all working together, it's going to work better. In the sense of, I think what they can learn is, I think that there's a lot of room, and probably more room, for creativity than maybe what some, maybe more in the B2B space or further into the product space, might feel is appropriate or effective. I think there's a lot more room for humor and kind of leading with something that, yes, is going to be technically correct and, sell a feature or what have you, but still feel human and dare I say it, even funny at the end of the day.
Naughty terms.
I know. I think MailChimp is a great example of this, where, they've got a killer product, they're constantly growing it, but at the end of the day, all of their marketing is just delightful. Like, it's cute, it's funny. I don't mind getting a MailChimp ad because it entertains me. So I feel like that is a big thing that I maybe see less of in the B2B space that I would love to see more of, that is definitely all over the B2C.
So I don't know if we touched on this before. I don't think we did, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here, but like, how do you justify brand spend then?
How do you justify brand spend? I think it comes down back to the measurement, right? Rule of thumb is what? Spend 5 to 10% on marketing entirely for your organization, right? How do I allocate between quote unquote brand initiatives and quote unquote product initiatives? Like, why is that the question? So I don't know if I have the best answer for that, so much as to say, like, I don't think it should be versus, it should be and. And if we're all looking at the same revenue goals, if we're all looking at the same business goals at the end of the day, then that is what should be driving how I am allocating my marketing spend. If product marketing had, 50% more leads than quote unquote brand or what was attributable or whatever, like, okay, are you actually, measuring correctly? Is your attribution modeling really the greatest, where you want to base your entire budget allocation on that question? Or, is it something where you want to maybe think more critically and think more long-term of, instead of focusing on, okay, what am I spending my marketing on this quarter or this, 6 months or a year? Where do I want to be next year, in 2 years, in 5 years, and invest in your marketing that way? And treat marketing not as some kind of discretionary spending, but literally an investment in the growth of your company. Because it's not going to happen without it, regardless of, what our CFO friends or other people might be thinking. So I think it's really just flipping the mindset about that, of marketing is an investment. I'm going to, allocate this investment in the way that's going to most effectively get me to where I need to be per my long-term plan.
So I got a thought on this, and Melyssa, I really want your opinion on this, but why wouldn't we measure brand, we'll call it, in the same exact way that we would measure demand gen, right? So the big thing about measurement in paid media, right, is that, like, this is where the whole problem with lead gen versus demand gen or whatever. And it's just because it's driving ebook download leads that you can measure how many you got, or just serving somebody the ebook and hoping that they read it, right? So the idea with demand gen is the less barriers to entry you create, the more exposure you're going to get to the right individuals. And then brand on top of that is adding in the right messaging to those people that is going to resonate. So the metrics should be the same. Like, if you are a lead gen, trial, demo focused organization, you can have your brand spend, but you should see growth in brand searches. You should see more bottom of the funnel leads coming in. You should see a faster time to close because people know, like, and trust you, and you don't have to earn their respect. You should still be looking at CAC to LTV ratios because that's kind of your entire marketing measurement piece. Like, the metrics don't change. You know, I think it's if somebody wants to know how many leads you got from your brand spend, like, I mean, that's kind of on them, honestly.
Well, and that's why, this is a hot take maybe, but yeah, you shouldn't be doing a campaign you can't measure. And, I feel like in modern marketing, there's no reason why that can't be the case. Can you put a hard number on, the ROI on a celebrity endorsement? Maybe, maybe not. Can you do that for the ads and the content that was created based on that partnership? Absolutely. So I think that's where it's innate in how you approach what you're working on. So if you do it well, there shouldn't be a discrepancy in measurement or an inability to measure. It's just either a slightly different anyway, set of metrics, or something that maybe isn't, directly tied to leads. Maybe it's tied to something like, I don't know, traffic or views, or something that's maybe a little bit of a, higher up the funnel than like lead form fill or something like that.
The metrics are all there. It's just whether or not you're looking at leading indicator metrics, if you're doing predictive modeling based off of investment.
Yep.
Super Bowl is a big brand play, right? Like, this is the biggest example, but those companies are not trying to see how many items they sold that are from the Super Bowl ad, but they do have all of their, how much traffic's going to their website. They do have their sales metrics, so they're able to see the uptick, right?
Right.
I think that the thing that you always have to balance is correlation versus causation. And that's just where you need the right predictive modeling systems in place, because even with a Super Bowl ad, you can't, yes, you ran it, but you can't say that, oh, they saw the ad, and because they saw that ad is why they purchased. I mean, you have an idea because usually that's such a big thing, but I guarantee that there are people, that subset the line that you're at, that you would stay at, is going to stay the same. Like, those people would have bought anyways, whether or not they saw the Super Bowl ad or not. And then the spike is kind of the predictive model of what you think came from it.
Right. But that's also where, metrics like brand lift, while might feel fuzzy, are actually incredibly important. And your, market share, voice, and things like that are very important. And, I think what trips people up is like, is that as telling or as important as something like lead, which is like very hard and very easy to measure. I think it's this like false dichotomy of the two, having this conflict where, yes, especially in larger organizations, they do, and they certainly do when jockeying for budget a lot of the time. But at the end of the day, they should be very measurable regardless. And they, should be working together. And, if brand is creating that affinity and that, kind of sense of really, I like this brand, I know this brand, okay, maybe I want this brand. And then we're moving into, our demo or whatever we're doing in terms of our sales process. Like, that is huge. And why wouldn't you want to invest in that? Because that's only going to improve everything else.
So we led off this conversation with kind of why these silos have been created, and it stems from leadership. So how I want to kind of close out this conversation is, you talked about measurement, right? Justification is what led to that kind of answer that you guys just kind of walked through. But like, what else can brand and product do to essentially manage up to leadership that created these struggles, right? How do you create that justification, but also how do you create that collaboration that allows leadership to see the light, to see the brand and product together in that same sound? So James, as the lowly product guy, you want to go first in answering that?
I think it's about working together towards the common goal. Like, you need to sell them on the common goal and then work down from there. There's really no other way. The brand investment has to be part of the marketing investment, whether it's through paid media, whether it's through messaging. I always use this is a very small example. Like, we do a lot of creative testing in paid social campaigns with like different creative, and certain messaging resonates better than others, and brand is all part of that. Like, you need that person. I'm going to give this example because we used to ask this on interviews all the time, right? So the like, sell me a pencil thing, right? The thing that I always looked for in this is that somebody wasn't going to go through and show me all of the features of the pencil. Like, oh, it has a sharp tip. Oh, it's yellow. Oh, it has an eraser, right? Those are all great. Those are features. Those are products, we can call them. What you look for is, what can you do with that pencil, right? How is this pencil going to improve your life? How is this pencil going to help lead you to achieve your goals? And that's the brand piece, right? And that's also the piece that sells at the same time, right? Nobody buys the features, they buy the result. So yeah, it's, you have to, when you sell them on the result, these are the components that are needed. You can't cut any, period.
But on the flip side, at the end of the day, that pencil had better work. That's the other side that's just as important as that, exactly as what you said, is that, full-blown emotional sales pitch about the pencil. It's definitely sides of a coin in my perspective. Yeah. And in the sense of working together, I really think that it starts, as much as you were saying it's top down, Andy, and it is, I think it's also bottom up. So thinking, we're working on a white paper that we're going to put out this month. Cool. Great. So who is at that editorial calendar meeting where we're deciding that we're doing white papers? Who is in that, meeting for each individual piece of content? Like, who, are there stakeholders from all of those departments there? Are people aware? Is there open access and open communication to the information that's there? One of the biggest things that I feel like brings people together, particularly on the, maybe the B2B side where content really is the core of her marketing machine, is who is in the room. Just get people in the room. It can be once a month. It doesn't need to be, marathon meetings, but, product, customer success, sales, marketing, like everyone has good ideas and everyone has good insight. So why aren't we tapping people on the shoulder when we're ready to start creating things that would need something like that, instead of just kind of going and doing what we think is right, which might be right, but could be better with other people in the room. So for me, it's yes, can, restructuring happen, which depending on the size of your organization may or may not be possible. And if not, but it can happen at the smallest levels, at those weekly or monthly meetings, and grow from there. Hey, we're making a case study. Great, cool. The customer success, but you know what? We want to talk about a specific feature that they're using in a way that product didn't even think was possible. Awesome. You know what? Hey, marketing, this feature is being used in a new way by this cool company. Great. We have a case study. Sweet. We have a campaign. Here are all of your ads. Here's everything that we're doing. And it's based on this conversation that we had, because all of them played a part in the development of what the end product is, which is the case study and this awesome campaign around it, because there was a story there that could only be told by the three people working together. So to me, it's definitely that, more than the sum of its parts kind of feeling, whatever, it's a little touchy feely, but I think anybody at any level can start to try to break down these silos, even if they're not at the most senior levels.
I will say one last thing to add on to that point of bringing people into the room is those individuals need to have the self-awareness of why they're being brought into the room and not to hijack the conversation around things that are not pertinent to the outcomes that are being desired, but also outcomes that, just are going to take the direction of the meeting into something that is just not worthwhile. There have been many meetings that I've been in with corporate marketing, brand marketing, and product marketing, where product marketers come in and they are not as educated about what is all happening, and the conversation just goes off the rails. And that comes back to that collaboration. As you create the collaboration, as you create the roundtable, and it continues to be facilitated and fostered, I think those types of conversations start to go by the wayside. And that's one of the challenges that I think many internal stakeholders on the brand side face today. But you can't really resolve those challenges without starting to nip it in the bud. So as we bring this episode of Digital Banter to a close, Melyssa, you're our guest. I'll give you the final word if there's anything else you want to add on to today's topic.
Invest in your marketing the way that you would invest in your stock portfolio. Like just do it and plan for long term.
All righty. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us for another episode of Digital Banter. Melyssa, thank you for joining us today. As always, like, subscribe, connect with James, myself, and Melyssa on social, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to Digital Banter. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.